JD Vance massaged his temples as he signed the last document on his desk. The clock read 7:30 p.m., another day that had stretched well beyond normal hours. The fluorescent office lighting had given him a dull headache. "That's the last of them, sir," his assistant said, collecting the papers. "Thanks, Melissa. Go home to your family." Alone in his office, JD loosened his tie and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He pulled out the worn jeans and Ohio State sweatshirt he kept there for evenings like this. The transformation from businessman to ordinary citizen took less than 2 minutes, a ritual that helped him shed the day's stress. The sweatshirt had a small tear at the cuff, a battle scar from yard work last fall. The jeans were faded at the knees. His leather boots, scuffed but comfortable, completed the uniform of anonymity he craved after days of being Mr. Vance. Driving toward home, his thoughts drifted to a strong cup of coffee. On impulse, he turned left toward Hillcrest Coffee, the small cafe he'd purchased 3 years ago as an investment property, but rarely visited during business hours. The previous owner had stayed on as manager, handling day-to-day operations, while JD remained a silent partner. "Just one Americano," he murmured to himself, then home. He parked his modest sedan in the small lot, appreciating how the evening light cast long shadows across the storefront's rustic facade. Inside would be warmth, the comforting aroma of fresh coffee, and, most importantly, no one expecting anything from him. JD valued these moments of normalcy. Despite his success, he'd never quite adjusted to being treated differently. At Hillcrest, he was just another customer, exactly how he preferred it. He switched off the engine and headed inside, unaware that tonight's visit would unfold quite differently than planned. The bell above the door chimed as JD stepped into Hillcrest Coffee. The familiar aroma of freshly ground beans embraced him like an old friend. The evening crowd was sparse. 2 students hunched over laptops in the corner, a woman reading by the window. Behind the counter stood 3 employees he didn't recognize. The cafe manager had mentioned hiring new staff, but JD hadn't been by to meet them. A young man with styled hair and a crisp black apron seemed to be supervising the others. His name tag read Tyler. JD approached the counter, joining the short line behind a well-dressed couple. As they ordered complicated drinks with precise specifications, Tyler attended to them with exaggerated deference, laughing at their mild jokes. When the couple moved aside, JD stepped forward, but Tyler looked past him, calling to a woman in a business suit who had just entered. "I can help you over here, ma'am." "I believe I was next," JD said quietly. Tyler's eyes flicked dismissively over JD's worn sweatshirt and jeans. "Just 1 second, sir," he replied with a thin smile, turning his attention to the businesswoman. JD shifted his weight, watching as the woman placed her order. Behind the counter, Tyler muttered something to his coworker, who glanced at JD and suppressed a smile. Though he couldn't hear everything, JD caught the phrase, "thinks sweatpants are appropriate public attire." When Tyler finally turned to him, his tone had changed entirely. "What can I get you?" he asked flatly. "An Americano, please, extra shot." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "That's $5. We have drip coffee for $2.50 if you'd prefer something more." He paused. Suitable. JD felt a flush of embarrassment, followed by a spark of indignation. He pulled out his wallet. "The Americano is fine," he said, handing over a $10 bill. Tyler made the drink with minimal effort, sliding it across the counter with JD's change. "Have a nice evening," he said, already turning toward the next customer. JD picked up his coffee, noticing it had none of the careful presentation he'd observed with the previous orders. As he turned to find a seat, he caught Tyler rolling his eyes at his co-worker. JD chose a small table in the corner, positioned to give him a clear view of the counter. The Americano was decent. Tyler's attitude hadn't affected his coffee-making skills, but something about the interaction left a sour taste in JD's mouth. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check emails while discreetly observing the cafe operations. Tyler's pattern became apparent within 15 minutes. A middle-aged woman in designer clothes received eager service and a complimentary biscotti. The college students, when ordering refills, were acknowledged with perfunctory nods. When a man in dusty construction clothes entered, JD watched with growing unease. The worker stood patiently at the counter, his reflective vest still on, traces of drywall dust on his boots. Tyler made him wait while reorganizing cups that didn't need organizing. "What do you need?" Tyler finally asked, not making eye contact. "Large coffee, black," the worker replied. "Room for cream?" "No thanks, just black." Tyler prepared the coffee carelessly, some spilling over the rim. He slid it across the counter without a sleeve, forcing the worker to juggle the hot cup awkwardly. JD's jaw tightened. This wasn't what Hillcrest was supposed to be. When he'd purchased the cafe, he'd specifically told the manager he wanted it to remain a community space, welcoming to everyone regardless of status or appearance. The scene triggered memories from JD's own past, the sideways glances, the assumptions people made based on his clothes or accent. He'd worked hard to overcome those barriers, but he hadn't forgotten how they felt. As the construction worker settled at a nearby table, carefully wiping the spilled coffee with a napkin, JD made his decision. He wouldn't reveal himself as the owner tonight. That would be too easy, too predictable. No, this situation required something more thoughtful. JD sipped his coffee slowly, formulating a plan. Tyler needed to understand the impact of his behavior, not just face consequences for it. The lesson would need to be memorable, but also constructive. By the time he finished his Americano, JD knew exactly what he would do. The morning light streamed through Hillcrest Coffee's windows as JD Vance pulled into the parking lot. Today, he wore a tailored navy suit with a subtle pinstripe, a crisp white shirt, and polished Oxfords. His usual weekend stubble had been carefully shaved, and his hair was neatly combed. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, almost amused at the transformation from yesterday's casual customer to today's unmistakable executive. The cafe had just opened, and the morning rush hadn't yet begun. Perfect timing. JD straightened his tie and entered, the familiar bell announcing his arrival. Behind the counter, the morning manager, Sandra, brightened at the sight of him. "Mr. Vance, what a surprise. It's been weeks." "Good morning, Sandra. Just thought I'd stop by to see how things are going." As they chatted briefly about the business, JD noticed Tyler arriving through the back entrance, tying his apron as he prepared for his shift. According to the schedule JD had checked last night, Tyler was working a rare morning shift today, covering for someone on vacation. JD took a seat at the counter, positioning himself where Tyler would inevitably serve him. When Tyler emerged from the back room, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of JD in his suit, not recognizing him from the previous evening. "Good morning, sir," Tyler said with the deferential tone JD had observed him using with well-dressed customers. "What can I get for you today?" "Americano, extra shot," JD replied, intentionally using the same order as yesterday. "Absolutely, coming right up," Tyler responded enthusiastically. "Would you like a pastry with that?" "The almond croissants just came out of the oven." JD nodded. That sounds perfect. Tyler prepared the drink with meticulous care, creating an elaborate leaf design in the crema that had been noticeably absent yesterday. He warmed the croissant and arranged it artfully on a ceramic plate rather than the paper ones typically used. "Here you are, sir," Tyler said, placing the coffee and pastry before JD with a flourish. "Can I get you anything else?" JD took a sip of the coffee. "This is excellent, Tyler." Tyler beamed at the compliment and the use of his name, though confusion flickered across his face, wondering how this well-dressed man knew who he was. "You don't recognize me, do you?" JD asked quietly. Tyler studied him for a moment, then the blood drained from his face as recognition dawned. "You're from yesterday, the guy in the sweatshirt. And the owner of this establishment," JD added, extending his hand. "JD Vance." Tyler's mouth opened and closed without sound, his hand automatically reaching to shake JD's. I don't know what to say, sir. I'm sorry about—" JD raised a hand to stop him. "Let's not have this conversation here. Is Sandra here? Ask her if you can take a break. We'll talk in the office." 5 minutes later, they sat in the small back office. Tyler perched uncomfortably on the edge of his chair, his usual confidence evaporated. "Am I fired?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. JD leaned back, considering the young man. "That depends on you, Tyler. But before we discuss that, I want to tell you something about myself." Over the next 20 minutes, JD shared parts of his story. Growing up in a working-class family in Ohio, the struggles his family faced, and the times he'd been judged for his appearance or accent. "When I bought this café," JD explained, "I had a vision for it. Not just as a business, but as a place where everyone feels valued. The construction worker stopping in after a 12-hour shift deserves the same respect as the executive in a $1,000 suit." Tyler's eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I understand, and I really am sorry." "Being sorry isn't enough," JD replied firmly. "Understanding intellectually isn't enough either. That's why I'm offering you a choice." JD outlined the options. Tyler could leave immediately with 2 weeks severance pay, or he could commit to a month of morning shifts, 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., serving the early crowd of laborers, hospital staff ending night shifts, and service workers grabbing coffee before their day began. "During that month," JD continued, "I want you to learn their names, their regular orders, their stories. I want you to see them, really see them, not just their clothes or appearances." Tyler's brow furrowed. "And after the month? If Sandra reports that you've genuinely engaged with this opportunity, you can return to your regular schedule with a fresh start. If not, we'll part ways." After a long pause, Tyler nodded. "I'll do the morning shifts." "Good. Start tomorrow." The following weeks unfolded in ways neither man had fully anticipated. Tyler's first few morning shifts were awkward, his attempts at friendliness coming across as forced. But gradually, something began to change. There was Mark, the electrician who arrived at 5:15 a.m. sharp, always ordering a red-eye before heading to job sites. Tyler learned he was putting his daughter through college. There was Darlene, the night shift nurse who needed her cappuccino strong enough to stand a spoon in, who told stories about the babies she helped deliver. And Miguel, the landscaper who stopped by with his crew, who taught Tyler Spanish phrases between coffee refills. JD observed from a distance, occasionally coming in for coffee, watching the transformation with quiet satisfaction. 3 weeks into Tyler's sentence, JD arrived to find him in an animated conversation with the very construction worker who had received such poor service that fateful evening. They were laughing about something, the worker showing Tyler pictures on his phone. "That's Jordan," Sandra explained, following JD's gaze. "He's renovating his first house. Tyler's been giving him coffee tips for his new espresso machine." Later that day, JD was reviewing paperwork in the office when Tyler knocked on the door. "Mr. Vance, do you have a minute?" JD gestured to the chair across from him. Tyler seemed different, more grounded, less concerned with projecting an image. "I wanted to thank you," Tyler began, "for not firing me that day. I would have deserved it." "And now?" JD prompted. Tyler considered the question carefully. "Now I understand what you were trying to teach me. It wasn't just about being polite to customers regardless of how they're dressed. It was about recognizing the dignity in everyone." He paused. "My dad was a lot like Jordan, you know. Construction worker. I guess somewhere along the way I started thinking I needed to be different from him to be successful." JD nodded, understanding how easy it was for people to distance themselves from their roots, sometimes hurting others in the process. "Jordan's coming in tomorrow before his shift," Tyler continued. "I've been wanting to apologize to him specifically. I don't know if he even remembers how I treated him that night, but I do." The next morning, JD arrived early, taking a seat at a corner table. He watched as Jordan entered in his work clothes, and Tyler greeted him by name. After serving him coffee in a real mug, not the to-go cup Jordan typically requested, Tyler came around the counter. Their conversation was too quiet for JD to hear, but he saw Jordan's surprise, followed by a thoughtful nod and then a smile as he extended his hand to Tyler. The simple handshake between the college student and the construction worker represented exactly what JD had hoped Hillcrest would be, a place where barriers dissolved over a cup of coffee. As Tyler returned to the counter, catching JD's eye with a small nod of acknowledgement, JD realized the lesson had extended beyond what he'd intended. Tyler had learned about respect and dignity, yes. But JD had been reminded of something equally important, that sometimes the most powerful way to challenge someone's perspective wasn't through punishment, but through the opportunity for growth and understanding. He sipped his americano, watching the morning light fill the café as customers from all walks of life came through the door, each greeted with the same genuine smile from behind the counter.